the funny, not really that funny thing is, we all know we don't really have time. We know it won't wait. We know it goes quickly. We know all of that, and then we sit in an office committed to being unhappy at a job that doesn't allow us to spend the time we do have with the people we care the most about, which is them, right? Our families. And we tell ourselves that we're doing it for them, for better schools, for bigger houses, for fancier shoes. And yet when they ask for things that would call on your time, like help with a school project, or if you'll be at their game this week, if you can join them to watch a movie, if you have some time to shoot some hoops, you probably have to turn them down. You need to work, you tell them. Earning is how you get them the fancy shoes and bigger cars and fancy houses. And even as you're saying it, you know that something isn't quite right. I've been there. For 7 years, I was an attorney at a large firm. It's the kind of job your parents beam at when you announce it. And when you think of an attorney, you probably think of something like this, right? Powerful, strong woman lawyer. For me, it felt like this. I hated the job from the start. You know when they say, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life? I can tell you with complete authority that the opposite is also true. Hate your job and it will be torture from dawn until dusk and beyond. I started at the firm in the millennium year, 2000, whole new beginning, right? Whole new decade, whole new century. You'd think it could only go up from there. I jumped into my job with enthusiasm. I worked hard, so hard that together with my husband, we were able to buy a small house in the suburbs, and so hard that the first time I saw my neighbors in the daylight, we'd lived there for a year. It didn't help that I worked in a firm where the culture meant that there were a lot of people in similar situations. There were offices with children's artwork on the walls and the parents at their desks long after they should have been home. Office parties where parents' spouses weren't permitted to attend. Well-paid nannies whose tiny charges had transitioned to calling them mom. Earned weeks of vacation that weren't taken for fear one of the clients they'd worked so hard to bring into the firm either wouldn't approve or worse, would more enjoy the services of the associate that they got while I was away. Where maternity leave requests were met with closed-door talks about whether you were doing the right thing for your career. I was in a space where people had the kind of money that should allow them the freedom to have extraordinary lives, but who refused to use their time to do so. Flexible work arrangements were frowned upon. Oops, sorry about that. Flexible work arrangements were frowned upon. Downtime was discouraged. If it wasn't billable, it was a waste of time. And here's the thing. While the firm itself valued time to the point where it was tracked to the second, my fellow workers and I failed to realize the value of what we were giving away. I watched people die at that firm. With the artwork on the walls, the vacation days in the bank, I watched them sacrifice relationships, passions, opportunities for happiness, all for a shot at a bigger paycheck. I watched people talk about what they do when they retired and then never make it that far. I've seen bucket lists, that list you make of things you're going to do before you kick the bucket. I've seen them bucket lists that last longer than the people who created them, and they knew how to fill that bucket, but they never seemed to know when to start emptying it. In 2007, a few years after my second son was born, I decided I wanted something different for my life. I left the expensive suits behind, traded in the laptop, and set out to follow my passions as a full-time freelance travel writer. In a matter of months, I went from having an office with a window, a six-figure salary, and an assistant to having none of it. I no longer had the chunky paycheck coming to me every week, but what I did gain in return was time. I'd gone from never seeing my neighbors to having them over for backyard barbecues. I knew the names of my kids' friends' parents and which ones we maybe didn't want to encourage relationships with. My flexible schedule meant I could go with my kids on the field trips or talk with their teachers. I could attend the games. I could help with the homework. I could read for pleasure. I sniped at my husband less. I was less resentful. It was like this chain reaction of happiness. I was happier. My husband was happier. The kids were happier. My vision was clearer. I wanted more of it. Now, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. The change meant that we were living on a lot less than we might have had. The shoes weren't as fancy. The car wasn't as flashy. The mortgage was bigger than it would have been if I continued in the legal profession. And worse, we were quickly learning that the time we'd reclaimed from the office could easily be lost to other obligations if we weren't careful. Suddenly, play date appointments, swimming lessons, karate lessons, music lessons, and on it went. I had some control of my time with my new career as a freelance writer, but my husband still had a full-time job, and we were still mired in the obligations that come from just being a part of the middle class in North America. I always wanted time, but now that I had it, I realized that what I'd really wanted was time with my family. Our plate was stacked so high we had to juggle to keep things afloat. There was no time to sit down to get to dinner because the kids had to be in 2 different places on the opposite ends of town at the same time. We were losing our time again, but in a completely different way. We were growing apart simply because we weren't being together. We began to search for a way to get our family time back, and then we found it. Prepaid sabbatical. My husband's workplace offered it up to their employees. For 4 years, you'd have to take home less pay and work more hours, but for the 5th year, you'd get that time off. A full year off to do whatever you wished. They were taking your money and offering you time. We signed up immediately, and that's how in June 2011, we found ourselves standing at the airport with a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a couple of bags on the cusp of a whole new adventure. We rented our house, we sold our car, and cashed in on retirement savings. We said no to every play date, school day, extracurricular lesson, and obligation that didn't involve just the 4 of us. And then we packed away our staff and left. Over the course of the next 12 months, we watched elephants in Thailand, we swam in Colombia, forgive me. There we go. Elephants in Thailand. We swam in Colombian mud pits. We rode ostriches in Vietnam. We learned to jump higher with the Maasai. This is actually not the Maasai. We learned to feed kids at an orphanage in China, and we learned to jump higher with the Maasai in Africa. We ate when we were hungry. We slept when we were tired. We were together. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We had more time together than most parents will get with their kids in a lifetime. We were really happy, and we were broke. My freelance writing career plummeted that year. Trying to write for newspapers and magazines while sharing a room with 3 other people, 2 who snore and 1 who sleeps in the starfish position, turned out to be a tougher feat than I'd expected. I made less than 1/3 of the income I'd made in previous years. And of course, the trip itself was costing money too, right? We had to pay for airline tickets, and we were staying in hotels and homestays. We were eating out regularly and paying for admission to things. We aren't rich people, not in the way you'd think a world traveler should be. When we got back, there were bills to be paid, mortgages that had to be reorganized, and a lot of earning to be done. But given the chance, I'd do it again. Because while we couldn't afford to do this trip, we couldn't afford not to. I'm going to show you my kids. This is Ethan. He's my oldest. Before we left in 2011, he was 8 years old and in grade 3. Now, I don't know how many of you remember grade 3. I mean, really remember grade 3, but there is testing, a lot of testing, and there are bells all the time. They tell you when to eat and when to stop eating. They tell you when to stand and when to sit. I spent a day there as a parent volunteer, and I almost took up smoking on the lunch break. It's very, very stressful, and my little guy was feeling it. It took about 6 weeks on the road for his shoulders to relax to a normal position, even less for him to laugh like this. I hadn't even realized how tightly wound school had made him until he was free of it. The guy in the middle there, that's Cameron. He's my youngest. He was 6 when we left, and he was extremely shy. That changed once he realized that when we landed in some international playground and I said, "We've only got an hour," he had to make the most of it. Friends were made, emails exchanged, language barriers overcome, all while playing tag and frisbee. When he returned to Canada, he brought with him a self-confidence that was earned on the playgrounds of the world. It also had an effect on their relationship with each other. My sons became closer, more resilient, more forgiving, more open to new experiences. When you've only got each other for a year, you tend to resolve arguments quickly. When you've only got one toy car between you, you become inventive. And when there's no craft dinner on the island, you learn to eat fish. When exposed to challenges, they both grew in ways that simply couldn't have happened at home. On the road, they could be different people. They could try new things. They could fail, and they could succeed. My marriage was affected as well. It was stronger. A big blowout argument early in our trip led us to realize that we were in this thing together, and we'd better come to a better way of deciding how these things were going to be settled. So we made that decision, and we stuck to it. We knew when we set out that we were either going to come back and be happily ever after or divorced. So far, so good. The trip taught me other things, too. Putting you in touch with, so sorry. The trip taught me other things, too. It taught me that when time is limited to morning commutes and pre-soccer catch-ups, you don't feel as pressured to preach to the kids. You can start listening to them, and they can teach you a thing or two about your own prejudices and expectations. You learn that they can handle hard conversations. We talked about poverty and racism and religious freedom, and that they can carry those lessons with them long after you've come home. We learned that the time taken to get to know people is never wasted, that despite what you've seen on TV, there is real good in the world, and individuals will prove it to you when you're in situations where you need that generous kindness the most. Those are the people who will help you negotiate a cab in China, or put you in touch with their friends in Mumbai, or invite you into their home in France. We learned that you don't need many of the things that you were sacrificing time with your family to get. We lived for a year on 2 weeks worth of clothing and 1 suitcase each. A few weeks after we came back to our house, I realized that we owned 40 mugs. Really? Who needs 40 mugs? It made us reassess our lives. You know, we learned that the things you need aren't things at all, but people. That there's no time spent at the office that's ever going to outweigh laughing until you cry with your family. No greater gift than getting to know your kids as the individuals that they are. That the best souvenirs are not the t-shirts or the tchotchkes you left behind or the silk robes you didn't buy, but the shared memories, inside jokes, and stories where only the 4 of you know the punchline. It took a full year, 6 continents, 29 countries, for me to learn these things. You don't need to go nearly as far, or it doesn't need to take you nearly as long. Case in point, last month I was home with the boys. It was the last week of summer. I was feeling very antsy about the back-to-school year, and I could feel it all looming. The deadlines, the rules, the bells, still haunting me. So I grabbed the boys and we ran away to Niagara-on-the-Lake. Now, Niagara-on-the-Lake is about 2 hours from my house, and tourists go there all the time. We did some of the touristy things. We watched a play, we ate dinner overlooking the falls, but we also did some non-touristy things. We took a long walk in the evening. We stopped to take in a sunset. We sat on a park bench and ate ice cream while watching people walk by. We talked about the boys' excitement for the school year ahead, but we also talked about their concern about whether they'd outgrown old relationships. And they did express their opinion that last year's mom-made lunches were lacking in creativity. We solved that one. Now they make their own lunch. We had conversations that could probably have happened at home, but don't. Because at home, there is work to be done, there are neighbors to say hello to, there are routines to be followed, there are goals that need to be achieved. Just the physical act of leaving our neighborhood and exploring someone else's gave us back time to reconnect, to reset ourselves, to reestablish our relationships. Never get so busy making a living that you forget to make a life. I love that quote. My advice to you, make a life. Travel to India or to Indiana. Visit the Grand Canyon or the park a few blocks over. Don't just keep going. Choose to make your time matter. Before I close, I want to share a short video with you. In words far more eloquent than mine, they speak to the importance of stepping off the hamster wheel. If you could play the video.
In music, one doesn't make the end of a composition the point of the composition. If that were so, the best conductors would be those who played fastest. And there would be composers who wrote only finales. People go to a concert just to hear one crashing chord, because that's the end. But we don't see that as something brought by our education into our everyday conduct. We've got a system of schooling which gives a completely different impression. It's all graded. And what we do is we put the child into the corridor of this grade system with a kind of, come on, kitty, kitty, kitty. And yeah, you go to kindergarten, you know, and that's a great thing because when you finish that, you'll get into first grade. And then, come on, first grade leads to second grade, and so on, and then you get out of grade school, you've got high school, and it's revving up, the thing is coming. Then you're going to go to college, and by Jove, then you get into graduate school, and when you're through with graduate school, you go out to join the world. And then you get into some racket where you're selling insurance. And they've got that quota to make. And you're going to make that. And all the time, this thing is coming. It's coming. It's coming. That great thing, the success you're working for. Then when you wake up one day about 40 years old, you say, my God, I've arrived. I'm there. And you don't feel very different from what you always felt. And there's a slight letdown because you feel there's a hoax. And there was a hoax. A dreadful hoax. They made you miss everything. We thought of life by analogy with a journey, with a pilgrimage, which had a serious purpose at the end, and the thing was to get to that end, success or whatever it is, or maybe heaven after you're dead. But we missed the point the whole way along. It was a musical thing, and you were supposed to sing or to dance while the music was being played.
Love that video. So my advice to you, sing or dance or travel while the music is being played. Be greedy about your time. Take it back from the people or things that would threaten to squander it, and spend the time you have on the people you care the most about. Turn down that promotion if it means you're giving time to the wrong end of your life, because life is finite. There's an end date, and most of us don't know when it is. Few among us will ever have it all. It's highly likely that you won't ever have both an abundance of time and an abundance of money. There's only so much time, and you will have to choose. My suggestion to you is to always choose time. Thank you very much.